Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to figure out what the future lies for smart buildings. It's great to have you today. Um, in case you are wondering who we are listed on mondaylive.org, links to our profiles anyway. So you can head over there to investigate more about this group. Also, point out that the views expressed here on this show are personal, not of any company or organization, and do post questions, comments, and other relevant conversations in the Zoom chat. We really like to make this as interactive as possible. And if you want any of the information that's on this deck, it is also available on the homepage of mondaylive.org. So this being July 2024, we are focused on understanding the issues regarding integrating silos that exist in buildings. We've talked over the past few months about how silos are sort of or essentially a barrier, or thinking about silos as a barrier to adoption of technology, and sort of we're trying to figure out exactly what that means in the few shows that we have in July. And today we'll have our normal sort of chit chat, and then we want to talk about in the silos. We want to talk about the apps that are needing or requiring silos to interoperate. That's kind of the focus of this week's conversation. So really looking forward to that, and hopefully some interesting discussion. This is Ken Sinclair's slide. He is unable to be with us due to some personal travel. I thought I'd just pick off a couple of the points that he's mentioned here. And really the first one is this sort of notion at the top here, that certainly, I think this is what Ken is talking about there, and he's mentioned it several times on Monday Live here, is that AI really needs the operational technology, because AI in itself cannot touch physical equipment, right? It doesn't have the ability of doing that, which is really what the silos are all about. The silos actually touch physical things, depending on which silo you are. And I was listening to an interview with Yuval Harari. Yuval, what's his middle name? Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens* and other sort of really interesting books about civilization. And he was talking about AI and his perspective as to the difference between AI and humans. And he's talking about the way we learn and the way AI learns, and it really speaks to this very point that Ken was talking about. The way we humans learn is that we focus on things. We go to school to learn about medical issues or lawyering or whatever it is. We that's the way we learn, and it's really the only way we can learn. To focus. We can't learn in a very broad sense. Whereas AI is completely different. The way it learns is just consumes the whole internet, and there's very little focus. And therefore, what it does is very different. It's not very focused, right? It's especially sort of the next evolution of AI when we get to AGI, the general intelligence. So this it's kind of interesting that that interview and that perspective, and it's really sort of a key part of the difference between AI and us as humans. And he goes into other sort of interesting perspective on that, but that's kind of what I took out of that. The United Community, obviously, we're talking about both automated buildings and Monday Live organization. Yes, I do go for a walk every now and again with Monty, my dog, which is always good. And I think the sort of the summaries that Ken and Kelly are doing using AI of Monday Live's sort of sessions, it's actually quite interesting. This one is basically the show that we had last week. So it's worth reading, and worth maybe passing on to people, sharing with others if they are trying to sort of figure out what's going on. So That's all I kind of wanted to pick up on from this slide. And beyond that, just a reminder again that the recording of that session that we had in Tampa is still there on this link that's available to you. That's now 3 weeks ago, but it's still very relevant for what we're talking about. And the community link board, as always, just to put it there for various links. So open it up to the floor. Any thoughts about anything that I just brought up, or any other thoughts completely different? Hearing nothing, let us move on then. Okay, so integrating building silos. So last week we spent the show talking about the silos that exist in a typical commercial building, and this is a list of the silos that we worked on. We acknowledge that it's not complete. There are things that's missing. That's not really the point. The point was that there are very different silos that do very different things, and we were sort of talking about these silos last week, and it became clear that just sort of looking at the silos like this is really difficult, because they have large sort of overlaps with each other, and they're not exactly the same thing as each other necessarily. Some of them are sort of groups of people, others are tools, right? So it's kind of difficult. So we wanted a different way of looking at this problem, and we discussed this and came up with a concept of really just sort of focusing on apps. And we had a bit of a debate about why we're thinking about it in terms of the word apps, as opposed to other terms like use cases and sort of scenarios and whatever. We think apps is important because, especially today, apps is really something that is really very personal and something that we use almost on a daily basis, right? They're very specialized. They do something specific. They're very personalized because you have the app in your environment to do your thing. The availability is really sort of the key part of apps. You just install it and you know it's there. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's paid. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of accessibility. And obviously, from a point of view of scalability, everybody in the world can technically install apps because they're very easy to think about, and they're secure. So we use them daily. So this is the rationale of thinking about the apps, because apps are basically how today in the 21st century we interact with things, with systems. So what I did was I put together this little matrix spreadsheet, and which we're gonna spend this hour filling out. So across the top, what you see here are all of the different silos that we talked about last week. Kind of rearrange them a little bit so that they're all sort of groups of people doing things, or things that happen, or sort of sets of data. So there's, as far as I know, there's nothing on the sort of list of silos that are sort of applications or systems necessarily, although in some areas it's a little bit vague. So we have architecture and design, which is obviously what the building looks like, the engineering and the construction, which is very important, the BIM side of things, the modeling of the building itself, the commissioning, HVAC controls, which we're all very familiar with, automation, scheduling, lighting, fire, life, CCTV, people transport, visitor management, and into the maintenance management, decarbonization, space utilization, grid, EV. I'm not going to go through all the rest, right? But all of the different things, all the way to janitorial services, which is part of silo that occurs in buildings. And what I've done on the rows is actually created potential applications, right? And just to kick things off for us, I created an application that I think we all should be familiar with quite well, or a class of applications, which is an HVAC supervisor, something that we've all sort of seen in the past few decades. And what I've done is I've kind of put sort of a bit of a scoring mechanism as to the relevance of that silo for this application. right? So this is kind of the cross point, right? So what I'm saying here is that an HVAC supervisor has a little bit of interaction with the architecture and design. It typically there's a floor plan, so it needs to get that from somewhere, but it's not really highly dependent on it. Whereas it is quite dependent on the engineering and the construction side, especially when you're talking about consulting engineers and sequences of operations kind of things that happens there. Typically, there's hardly any BIM involved. There's obviously a lot of commissioning, which is something that happens. The HVAC control sort of logic itself is obviously the most important. So I put that as a 5. It's kind of the key thing. Automation is how you make the sort of orchestration of the HVAC to make that work. Scheduling is something that's always there in HVAC supervisor, so I put that as a 3. And all of these things I put as a 1. Now, obviously, depending on the building and application, it could be different. But generally speaking, they can be brought in, they could be integrated relatively easily, but it's not a core part of it. Whereas maintenance is a little bit different. And then we get into these sort of areas where we get zeros, right? Typically, there's really no interaction between an HVAC supervisor and an ERP or CRM system. Same with janitorial system. Right? So this is kind of the way this sheet has been designed. And total that up and come up with a number. I'm not quite sure whether this number is going to be very useful at the end of the day, but that's kind of the mechanism I created. So what I wanted to do is go along some of these lines and some of these rows and try and fill them out. And I put energy management as the next one because maybe it's an area that's easier. And these are the apps that we decided last week in our planning call that we'll talk about energy management. Meeting room scheduling, classroom scheduling, they're both scheduling, but slightly different. CMMS and capital planning. So these are kind of what we want to focus on. And if we have time, we can do others as we need to. So open it up to the team here. Is this a reasonable way?
I have a few questions. HVAC supervisor, what is that? Because I'm seeing that as a traditional BMS application. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
That's exactly the intent. It's what you would get from a typical control system vendor. Some are on the screen right now.
So just to go through the first line then, with BIM, if we're looking towards the future and not how they work now, but what is this future world that we're looking at where there is interoperability and data exchange, I would say the BIM would be very important because then you can locate, for someone who's new, they can know which floor and which part of the floor the units are located in. So I think we need to think of this future state with these letters. I'm sorry, with the prioritization. And I would put the BIM stuff as a 3 or a 4 because, especially if an outside company is coming to service a building and the person has no institutional knowledge of the building, it's going to be super important to know where things are and have floor plans or 3D drawings or something like that. So, or is that in a work order? I mean, this is where the definitions of these apps on the left are very key.
And you're right. This is how things are today, especially this row, right? And you're quite right that many of these could be reviewed, but this is how the way I'm thinking about this particular row is how traditional HVAC people think about how to manage their systems. And I'm going to call on Roger, Mark, and Anno, and Tracy, actually pretty much everybody that live in that world. Is this a reasonable starting point?
And I would add to that question, sorry to cut across, but why don't we have HVAC supervisor IBB version, and we can have a, here's the old way, here's the new way, and have a new row.
Yeah, because I think there's something in that, because I mean the supervisor is morphing off of site now. It's becoming more of a cloud app than it is a PC on site. So it's that's David's exactly right. I think that it's it is moving out from the on-prem to the
Okay,
cloud.
so what would be, and let's call it an IBB supervisor, thinking futuristic, what should it be?
So is
I'll-
architecture and design, does that mean all of the building documentation? Does that mean the as-built, the specs, the sequences of operation, the owner's manual? I would say access to that is very important.
Agree?
But again, I'll be quiet and let others on the call contribute.
And this, what's important, what's sort of interesting here is, David, you're almost the only one out of this group that is not a HVAC perspective, right? So you would come up with the comment that you just made.
To be honest, at this time, there's very little interaction between the architectural design and the HVAC supervisor. Are we talking bricks and mortar here, or what is it
I would think, Roger, that once the building is built and the GC and the design team turn over the documentation package and everything, that the supervisor would need to have. Do you have that in its own file structure over here, or do you access it through your ideal supervisor app? And right now, I would see the way this working is that you have a work ticket from CMMS, and so I don't see the CMMS across the top as a
no, because
column
I put
anymore.
it. We decided to put it as an app. CMMS is an application.
So that means the supervisor can't ever see that through the HVAC supervisor app. So if you have a ticket associated with a leaky fan coil unit, you won't be able to go to the supervisor app from the CMMS, or from the CMMS, you won't be able to go to the supervisor.
Well, I guess this is my challenge is the supervisors, as opposed to edge products, for instance. Here, if you did have the leaky valve, then that would be feeding into the general pot that we're talking about, that the the IWMS could pick up on to generate the works order.
Yeah, the alarm would trigger the work order, ideally, depending on the criticality of the alarm or event.
But that then comes into column G across the top, which is really the edge products, the controllers themselves.
Good point. Yeah, great point.
That's what's generating the information.
Because you're talking about this interaction between the CMMS and the HVAC.
I think that's where David's talking about. Whereas, really the supervisor is just monitoring and manually allowing people to go, interact with the system, with the HVAC controls, etc.
But I've seen this also go horribly wrong on projects where you set this auto creation of tickets, and then the building loses power, and there's a ticket for every single piece of equipment that lost power, and they have 600 work orders to clear out.
I think that'll be corrected. When we first started BMS systems, when you lost the power, when it came back up, you got thousands and thousands of alarms. I think we kind of sorted that stuff, and that integration with the IWMS is in its infancy really at the moment.
Would it be more useful for us to tackle one of these other use cases? Because I sort of wondered about this supervisor being what we'd end up talking about, which is not necessarily the what we're trying to do here.
Sure, why not pick another one?
Let's pick the meeting room. So this is really meeting room scheduling, making sure meeting room works. And this is something that I think many of us have heard from building owners as being a sort of a frustration, that they have meeting rooms and they never know the how they are being used, how well they're being used, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So what are the silos that are necessary to interact with meeting room? Does it care about the design of the building itself, other than the shape and the
But
what the meeting room is?
not really.
Not really. So, but maybe a 1, right? Very
We're
minimal.
looking at how many rooms there are, what assets.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Number 1, maybe a 2.
I could argue that at the moment, Anto, especially with post-COVID return to office. There's a lot of stuff, for example, we're doing where we are remodeling floors and layouts to get folks back in. And meeting rooms are absolutely being redone from an architecture design. Now, internal, not external. So if you're changing, if you mean architecture and design, both external and internal, right? Is that
Internal of the building, you mean? Yes.
Yeah.
It should be both. It should be both.
It should be both. So, and that's the case. There's a lot of interaction going on between meeting room designs, layouts, new thoughts, new ideas, how to change the way that people are using buildings now. The old, a table and 6 chairs doesn't cut it anymore. We do a lot of, for example, there's open plan meeting rooms, small ones too, big ones, little ones, which is very relevant to the design of the layout.
So how?
But Arno, from an application standpoint, what if any involvement does the architectural side have to do with the app that would control the scheduling of the room itself?
It comes down to that there's just such a change in the types of rooms now that we're designing, Steve. Before you had 10 rooms with 6 desks, 6 chairs, and 5 rooms with 4 chairs, and now we've got all sorts of different combinations: open plan, closed plan, one-on-one, lecture type, not lecture type. So the app has to really deal with those different designs in mind, as opposed to just simple, how many chairs do you have? So it's not a big deal, but it's more than one.
But you bring up a great point, Arno, and how I've done this integration in the past was actually with the Windows, not Windows, with Microsoft Exchange. And I think instead of, I don't know what you mean by scheduling.
Which is up here, so where there's a scheduling thing right here.
Yeah. Do
Do
you mean like the calendar application?
Yes.
So
and that will be here. I would say that would be a 5.
Yeah.
Calendar and directory, and then that gives you the room names, the count, and depending on the naming convention and how the organization works, it also gives you the type of room it is. Like huddle room,
and with that is also the routing. How do I get from the elevator to that room?
Wayfinding,
yeah.
Okay, so that gets a 5, right? Because if anything, without scheduling, you have nothing. So what about some of these others, engineering and construction? So from an engineering perspective, not from the design of the architecture, I think it's probably the same as the architecture and design. Probably important, right?
It is.
You need that for floor plans.
Yeah. So do you need BIM? And sort of the way I think about,
I would actually have BIM instead of architecture and design as the 3, because that's where the data should be coming from.
That's actually, I agree with, was that David? Sorry. BIM is actually the representation of the architecture and design, right?
Yeah. So I would actually turn architecture and design down to 0 and make BIM the 3 or 4.
Do you think it could be higher than 3 or 4? I mean, the way I'm thinking about it is
So
three.
it depends on the meeting room application. If it has the capability of showing floor plans and room details, sure, it could be higher, but it really depends on what the meeting room application is. And frankly, I don't see meeting room scheduling systems much anymore at all. I see all the room scheduling being done in the calendar. And then that interfaces
Yeah.
with the AV control system in the room.
Yeah. That's actually really true.
So what about these three: commissioning and HVAC controls and automation? What scores do they?
0 for commissioning, 0 for automation, because the automation should come from the BMS. Or actually the calendar should be the source. And then HVAC control, you should have, I would say, I know I would love to fight you all on this, but temperature control should be on there. Being
Okay.
able to allow the room to have like a 3-degree swing up or down.
You got to have, I
With
mean,
a
that also
thermostat.
interacts with all the air quality, the
Yep.
the lighting and all the
Yeah.
other stuff, which
Yep.
can go through HVAC control. So it's reasonably
So
important.
that's a 4. That's what
Yep.
I'm hearing here.
Sure.
Yeah. Automation, David thinks is a non-starter, but
Well,
But you
I
have
don't,
to
what is,
automate-
isn't,
Yeah,
is
what is-
automation the BMS system? Or is,
well,
Or is
my sort of
HVAC
way of
controls the
thinking,
BMS
my
system?
way of thinking of the difference is controls is the actual controls that you're doing to turn off fans and valves and whatever, whereas automation is the sort of the bigger picture orchestration of all of the components of the HVAC. And Phil Zito talks a lot about how they are fundamentally different. So that's kind of my thinking about that, although it would be totally wrong.
I think just maybe to help folks, the problem I've always had with the term automation is we tend to lump it in with the BAS system, the BMS system, because that's where automation happened.
Right.
I think from a silos perspective, that's no longer true. HVAC controls have their own automation. Lighting has their own automation. What else we got there? There's the IoT stuff has their own automation. They all have their own automation capability these days. It's just that in the old days, quote unquote, we lumped it into the BMS system because that was the only place we had to land the automation piece.
So should we forget it, or should we?
To Anno's point, a new term that I've started to use is universal automation.
There you go.
To your point,
Brian Turner just said integrated automation.
pardon?
Brian Turner on chat just said integrated automation, which is another.
Another word, universal automation.
Yeah.
To accomplish a ideal non-siloed environment in a building, you gotta have integrated automation, universal automation. If not,
Okay.
you're not gonna have it. Forget it.
Okay, so what score does that get then? Here.
Me, I think it's a 5.
Yeah. If it does it in the term of Mark's terminology or Brian's terminology, yeah, it's high. Not in the terminology of BMS only.
So what are all these other sort of things here?
We got to have lighting,
Yeah.
fire.
So,
Fire safety,
The
access.
one issue
Yeah,
with
that's true, you
integrated.
gotta have-
so are these all
integrated
5?
automation,
Yeah.
These all 5? CCTV probably is not a 5. And access is important.
One would
Probably
argue
the-
integrated automation is umbrella to a bunch of these things here.
Right.
Right? So I'm getting a little lost on why are we scoring lighting and HVAC and so forth separately, because that all falls under integrated automation.
So
To
it
me,
doesn't
the
make
more
sense.
important part of this exercise here is more digital. Either it does need something or it doesn't need anything, right? And that's the important part of this. How important it is it just depends if on the individual's use case, right? So,
I guess,
Tracy, I like that. It's kind of a binary. Is there a communication here or isn't there?
right.
What data is exchanged?
but I guess where
Depends on
Anto's
the
come from in
context.
the original thing is that right now, fire and life safety and lighting and all these things are sitting in a silo. We know where we'd like them to be, but at this point, they probably are.
This is the issue that we had with the supervisor, right? Are we looking
Yeah.
backwards? Are we looking in the rearview mirror or
Yeah.
forward?
So with fire life safety, I would say there doesn't need to be any connection whatsoever. Because
Right.
if an alarm goes off, it's your ears hurt and everybody evacuates the building. Having flash a little thing on the touch panel in the room, evacuate, I don't think there's any value in any integration.
Well, that's not strictly true, though, because
Okay.
if there's a fire alarm, sometimes you have to put all the fans on extract, or you have to do other things. In the
Oh, I'm
system.
not, I agree with
Well,
you
they need that
wholeheartedly,
interaction.
Roger, but a meeting room scheduling system doesn't need it.
Well,
Yeah, but it doesn't say
it
meeting
would,
room scheduling, it says meeting room in the app.
okay.
Well, you got scheduling up the top, so it's okay.
There you go.
But if it's a
Is-
meeting room
is-
scheduling system, it's going to be used to be a meeting room management system. And, you know, during that demonstration that we did in Washington, DC, was a great example of unfortunately, it was an active shooter demonstration, not active shooter, that showed the useful integrations of the fire life safety, door locking, communications, lights, HVAC, everything. It was actually a pretty compelling demonstration of the usefulness of lots of different systems that you wouldn't normally think have any relationship to each other. And that's what I'm seeing is that the score on every one of these could very well be 5s across the row on every one of these. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. All of them 5s.
But to be fair, Rick, I mean, if you're, but if you're looking at it as meeting room scheduling, the fire life safety thing it's always going to be on 24/7. They're not going to change it because people are in there or not.
Right.
No, but people
if you've
use
got
the
a fire in there,
classroom.
you're going to actually want to evacuate the building anyway.
But the
And
first
so-
responders will use the meeting room schedule and the classroom schedule to see if there's somebody supposed to be in there. And so if you don't have it tied in, then they can't use that. And that's what I mean by the types of apps that are going to be possible would be 5s. It'd be just go ahead and put 5s in every cell on this entire sheet, because we haven't thought through what might be possible because it just hasn't been possible.
So
That's
the 5 that you just mentioned is this 5, Rick. The active shooter is the emergency services kind of thing. That's one angle, but
well, it was a demonstration of a
Yeah, of
lot
that.
of different systems all working together, including social networking, IoT, air quality. I'm just going backwards. And that demonstration was an eye-opening, so how expensive is it to connect all those things right now? Ridiculously expensive. Are people doing it? Absolutely. Is there potentially a lower cost way of doing all these different data, what we used to call integrations? Yes, that's what we're trying to move towards, I believe, right?
So maybe the suggestion for the application, just instead of calling it meeting room scheduling, just call it meeting room management. Because it's more broadly focused, because you're going to schedule the room, but schedule relative to who is in the room, what their preferences are for the environment of the room, whether they have the right to be in the room through some sort of an access link, what information you might want to present to them once they're there, which doesn't necessarily be limited to environmental things. It could also be, hey, it's lunchtime. What would you like to order for lunch? And we're going to cater in some lunch, right? So if you start to think about it in more broad terms, in terms of what the occupants would want to have access to from an information standpoint, it could quickly become much bigger. So that's
So
my
why
2 cents.
would that management system care about maintenance?
IT tickets for this mic doesn't work, that speaker doesn't work, the
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah,
Oh,
blah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If the audio visual, they're trying to get
So-
online and they can't, the internet's down, or this, like you said, the speaker isn't working, their OWL device that they're trying to use to get the audio up on everybody's laptop, and the call in and the callers isn't working. So what do you do? How do you notify facilities come in and address the problem?
So that would prevent you from being able to use the meeting room, and therefore that has to be a 5.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
I think that's Rick's argument that everything's a 5.
Yeah.
Visitor management, I think that's obviously also a 5, because if you're going to accommodate visitors to come into, you need to know about that, and somehow there has to be some interaction.
Yep.
People transport, elevators and lifts.
If somebody needs access to the floor, then they have to be tied into the smart elevator.
Yeah.
Again, another 5.
You see a theme?
Space utilization, yeah.
Space
I mean,
utilization, definitely. Grid
okay,
interactivity.
I have to call time on this. So from 2010 or around 2010 to 2012, I was global director of integrated building technology for Crestron. So I oversaw the engineering and user interface, or worked with the engineering team on this type of application. And so this type of application, think of the HVA supervisor, but for all of the AV kit. So all of the control systems, and it usually included shade control, lighting control, interface via BACnet over IP with the BMS. We would share occupancy sensor data with the lighting control system, and we were doing literally all of this stuff. So from doing this multiple times, fire life safety would have nothing to do with that, either managing the kit in the rooms or the touch panels. And the touch panels, this is where the scheduling comes into play, because you can have the calendar event from Exchange show up on the panel outside the room and on the panel inside the room, or either or, depending on what the room had. And so the calendar application interface was obviously the most crucial, because that's how people actually booked the room, was through the calendar app. And so they wouldn't have to do a 2-step process to book the room. So the calendar is the most important thing, but there would never be an integration with the fire life safety. There wouldn't be an integration with the building transport, because it's not the AV system or the AV, building wide AV system it never happens that it's the glue that ties all this stuff together. And let me
ask you a question, David. And I think this goes to Rick's sort of point. To what degree would it have been useful to know about the status of the fire system, the status of emergency systems in a meeting room? Or put it the other way around, in what way would it be useful for the life safety system to know about the fact that there are 4 people in this room, and there are, in each of the rooms? Surely that has some value if the cost of doing so was almost 0.
So the head count of the people in the room is, I see your point, but the source of that data in the invite is in the scheduling system. So it shouldn't be gotten from the AV system. It should be gotten from the source of the data. And during a fire event, an alarm event, that would, I mean, the only time we ever did it was a binary, literally a binary yes or no. Because with fire life safety, the only way you can interact with them is typically with a relay closure, at least most systems in most buildings. So just like the BMS would get that one signal, you know, there's a fire, and the BMS would then go into the fire mode with the fans on or pressurized or not pressurized, whichever methodology they use to in a fire situation, depending on the building. Likewise, we would have the AV systems just get that, hey, there's a fire, and then it would just show, please exit the building on all the AV systems. And so it's only a binary interaction that there's a fire event. And I can go through all of these, like with lighting, it was a scene recall. And so you'd set up scenes, and it's basically occupied or unoccupied. And occasionally, maybe you might have more than one scene in a boardroom, but basically the only lighting interaction was occupied or unoccupied.
So David, let me give you another use case from the elevator standpoint, because the elevators are getting, as you know, smarter in terms of,
but they're over censored. Just ask Anno.
Well, there, it's not, was not, that was,
I'm making a joke from the last call. It's a joke. Go ahead.
All right.
Please.
Yeah. So anyway, the point being that I'm seeing elevators that no longer have buttons in them to pick the floor, right?
Yeah.
And instead there's a panel you have to go to in the lobby to announce yourself. So if I'm in my scheduling app for the conference room, and I know I'm going to have visitors coming in who are not employees, and ideally what I like to do is declare the visitor, have that integrate into the elevator system, so that when they come into the building, they're already given a code to enter into the panel so they come up to the floor. I don't know if anybody's tried that, but it would seem like a logical.
So I've done that on quite a few projects. Codes never work. And what happens is, and the way the security systems work now is people get a temporary badge with the QR code, and you go up to the elevator and it reads that, just like the turnstiles or the gates, you have your temporary badge with your QR code that lasts whatever, 12 hours. The same thing that works to open the access control gate in the lobby that lets you to the elevator lobbies, that same code is used to do the elevator.
Okay. Is that an access control?
Yes.
Part of the access control.
Yeah. Yes. And this is where I would break out CCTV as a separate system and access control as its own system.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll do that and not change the fire life safety to a 0. Thanks.
but integration between the access control and the scheduling is a desirable thing to be able to do.
Yes.
It's a necessity.
And, necessity, okay.
And but the same goes. Thing is, like, all of this is relatively unchallenging if it's a single owner operator of a building, like a Microsoft building or an Amazon building.
Yeah.
But when you get to a situation where it's a multi-tenant office building, all of this stuff becomes too cumbersome. And if we want to solve for that, that needs to be thought of in a different way, because right now in a multi-tenant building, the way it usually works is an email is sent to the front desk, and they add that person's name to the list for that day.
Right.
So in trying to automate this, the way to do it is that if there are participants, you have to be able to, in the calendar system, identify people, because usually there's a Zoom call or a whatever system you're using, or Teams, there's a Teams call with the rooms that are scheduled. So now you have the room in your building that's scheduled. How does anyone know if these people are going to be present, or are they going to be on the Zoom call? How and where are they participating? So how do you delineate outside guests
From visitor management.
But that's the thing, is there is no such thing as typically a visitor management system.
There is.
Well, in a shared office building.
I've worked with that before.
Okay, I mean, I have too.
But that is like hotels, you know, in terms of booking in hotels, it's the same thing. You know, so the registration that automatically kicks in the enablement of the room and the air conditioning and the door lock and all the other good things. And I think, you know, when we're talking about things like lighting, you know, it's like, what experience do you want when you sat in the room? Where if it's the sun's come around, you want the blinds to come down automatically, the lighting to turn up and down. What we're talking about here is the interaction of systems that would benefit that meeting room.
I think for the remaining 10 minutes that we have before the top of the hour, we should change applications just to give a different context, because the purpose of this exercise is not to figure out how to do meeting room. It's to figure out the sort of the patterns, the patterns that are sort of about the silos. I suggest we go on this one, this is kind of the biggie. So it obviously needs to know about its environment, and ideally from the architectural and design, which is the BIM side of things. So is that then just automatically a 5?
Yeah.
And the same with how the building was actually built and engineered. It needs to know all of that. Surely it would be beneficial if it did.
Yeah.
Right. So let's skip the BIM because we've dealt with that. Commissioning, does it need to know about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just HVAC, yes. Are we going all 5s here?
Yeah.
You know my vote.
This comes back to binary. I think the answer is yes for most of
Right.
these.
So 5 is the yes. Lighting, obviously.
Yep.
Yes. People transport, visitor transport, maintenance management, absolutely. Decarb, absolutely. Space, grid interactive, absolutely. EV charging.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Social network. I don't know about that one.
Well, people might well want to know when, you know, the restaurant's full or it's not, and whether they can order food and where they can
Which
get
is
it.
really what social network is. So yeah.
Okay.
I can give you another interesting use case on social network and CMMSs.
Is it a smart bathroom?
No. You know where tenants most complain about their building environment? Social networking.
Oh, where they can actually complain. Yeah.
They don't ring up the guy. They sit there and complain. I've called the guy 5 times and it's still too bloody hot.
Sure. I think I've probably done that myself.
There you go.
Reddit.
IoT, whatever it does, air quality, absolutely. Building's purpose. This is a sort of a silo. And last week we had a silo that said retail, and what I was meaning by that is that if it's a retail environment, what is the retailness of it? The purpose of it is its own silo, whatever it is, whether it's hospital or retail. So that's what this is. So obviously it needs to know that context. And we're just going all 5s. Is there anything that's not a 5?
So let me give you a different perspective of what I said. Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with the numbers. I think it's fine. But I think what you're seeing, though, is exactly the purpose of what we're trying to do. If these things were integrated, then all this stuff would make sense, right? That we would want to do all these things. And in fact, I would suggest to you, we're only touching the surface, and we probably, if we had the sort of integration that we want, this sort of applications would probably far exceed even what we're thinking here, right? Because there are probably different versions and things that we go, smart people are going to go, wow, if I could get that, and that, I can mix all that together and get this, right? That type of thing. So I think what you're seeing here, and the reason we're doing these numbers, is that I don't know, that there might be a couple of rare ones, you know, where the integration is of not value, because if it's done, there's all sorts of clever stuff I can do. That's how I would take this.
I would add another criteria is if it could be done in an economical way, economically, right? Because obviously anything could be done if you throw enough money at
Right.
it.
Yes, it has to be cheap enough. Yeah, it has to be cheap and easy enough.
Because who would ever want to put a 1 in emergency services, right?
Right. Run, Forrest, run.
Cheap, easy, loose, and shallow. Those are the, I think that's a banner around here somewhere.
But isn't it one of those pick 3?
No. You got to go for all 4.
Ah, right.
Okay, so janitorial services,
Yeah.
it's a critical part of it, right?
And I think BIM is as well, because they need to know about the asset management, the parts, the pieces, I don't think there's
Yeah, the
anything-
only reason that's blank is that we kind of decided that this column C is really BIM, but put it there. There you go. Maximum score.
So,
What does
so
that get
Anto,
us?
maybe that's from a practical standpoint, what Tracy was indicating earlier about binary. So maybe we're better off just check marking it. Yes. And if it's a low score, we for now treat it as a no effect, essentially. That's
So
just a thought.
let's do it the other way, because this also plays to what Anna was saying. If it was there, then you'd find a way of using it. Let's look at the capital planning row and just try and sort of see if there's anything that's not a 5. It's probably easier that way. Is there anything in here that's not?
How many of us have ever heard of a capital planning system or used one?
Well, I have one, so
Yeah. So this is the this is I guess a minor point, but the capital planning people that sell capital planning software, they would be the ones to ask. And I don't know if Pete's still on here, but you know, there are a few people that have used or worked for those companies for decades or consulted for them. And I think that question would be to them is, if the question you just talked or Anno made was, if it was easy to get this information, would it help with the capital planning for the purposes of what capital planning is trying to do? And I think the answer would be 5s.
All across?
as a result, yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at those categories.
So I would suggest architectural and design as a 5 and BIM as a 5, because that should be where you get your warranty information for how long the roof membrane is under warranty, and you know how long the elevator motors, everything, all of that information should come from the documentation. And if it's not there, the problems begin.
Certainly the maintenance management column has to have that.
It's a great point. Agreed. Because that should also be where deferred maintenance information is stored.
So you're saying that you don't care about visitor management, which kind of makes sense from a capital planning perspective.
Not
You
at
don't
all.
care.
It goes into the planning for next, when we redo this building, the point Anna was
Right.
making, when we redo the building, how should we redo it? Because we're going to redo it.
But visitor management only tells you how many visitors there are. It isn't telling you how the building's utilized.
My point is, there isn't a system that if I could get data out of it, that I wouldn't take data out of it, at least some amount. To Jim Lee's point, we don't need all the data. We don't need to create a whole new data lake and consume everything, but there are bits of data from every system that would be useful. And I'm not just trying to be difficult, although I am.
No. We need to have this healthy debate, Rick. This is a healthy debate to try to get to the truth. Completely agree with the
And this is the point that somebody made on a chat here somewhere, is like, nobody ever would have imagined the Uber app using the different sources of the systems, so therefore sources of data that it uses to come up with some totally new kind of app. And not to get too crazy on us here in the last minutes, but that's the point, is if it was easy to get, somebody might create an app that does things a little bit differently. And aren't we all hoping for that?
Yeah, and it's difficult to answer that because you can't imagine those sort of situations because you're not in that position of having an idea and being able to access all of the data to do whatever it is. We're not in that mindset. So
And
So
you-
one of the things, I'm sorry, Roger.
go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to say, one of the things that this grid doesn't work in some ways, the capital planning app and the energy management app. So yeah, I mean, I like how they interact with all those different silos, but they themselves are also of value of interacting with themselves, because the capital planning app does value-added analysis. For argument's sakes, they say on the HVAC controls, you should let your air handling unit run to fail for the next 3 months. But if I match that up with the energy management app of what the energy usage is out of that air handling unit, right, which does an analysis, then I'm saying, well, yeah, but maybe I'll, let it, I need to change it out earlier because running to fail next 6 months, but it's using twice the energy that it should. Anyway, in other words, the apps themselves there's value-added data analysis that they do to the stuff that they're integrated with that is useful between themselves as well. So
there are interactions between these rows, is what you're saying.
Yes.
I would argue that you can turn this whole thing on its side or move almost any one of these back and forth to top or side.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge here, right? What's called an application and what's called a silo. It can be a little hazy, in my opinion.
Yeah, because one of the things I've just been thinking through is with the whole hybrid working thing is how many things does that interact, because you've got a different amount of people coming into the building all day, and a lot of companies now beginning to use, you actually go online and actually say, I'm coming in the office on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and stuff like that. And they manage the building from that data.
Right.
It's been an interesting discussion, though. I mean, it really illustrates a couple of key points, in my opinion, just kind of mostly sitting back and listening. One is we absolutely don't know what we don't know in terms of future, how all this is going to come together. We're trying to score these things based on what we understand today. And once this is open, all bets are off from that standpoint, right? We haven't imagined what the applications will be going forward. So it's hard to put any kind of a score. That was the trouble I was having. I can't put a score because every time I score something low, I can think of a case where it goes high. So,
and if you can't, someone else might, right?
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think that's a great summary, actually, Tracy. It's everybody's going to actually have their own scores here in each box.
Yeah. We've illustrated more than anything else the absolute need and opportunity of open interoperable data.
Right.
Just by listening to the amount of debate and argument over things here today. So
I think that's what is proven.
And to Mark's point, we can't expose this to owners. It's got to be way easier, right? We'll scare everybody off.
Well, owners are articulating the need for this pretty well. So I'm not sure I agree with Mark that owners will be scared off by it because they've been begging for it for decades.
They want the sausage. They don't want to know how it's made, though. That would be my argument.
Because we aren't offering it to them, they've had to get really good at being able to understand the problem, being able to articulate it, and sometimes DIY, doing it themselves.
Well, I would also add your 4 parameters, right? What was it? Cheap, fast, easy. What were the 4 criteria?
Cheap, fast, cheap, easy, loose, and shallow.
There you go. Cheap, easy, loose, and shallow. It has to come with that. Because
All right, with that, I think we need to wrap this a few minutes over the hour. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been a great conversation,
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anto.
and
Okay,
see you next week. Have a great week.
guys.
everyone. Bye.
cheers, bye.